I'm not that star developer on the team. I'm the one that needs to make sure my team is successful and staying out of the details, kind of being in that coaching, mentoring role is really what not only is going to help you deliver that, but frankly is what's expected of you.
Welcome to the Team Amplifier Podcast. I'm your host, Byron Sommerdahl. Here you'll be inspired by industry leaders who build flourishing tech teams. Stay tuned and prepare to be amplified.
3, 2, 1.
Hey everybody, today I'm talking with Garrett Vargas about staying out of the details. We're going to unpack that idea here in just a few minutes and figure out what that means and how it can help us to build teams that flourish, which is what this podcast is all about. So Garrett is a big tech and startup executive now working as a fractional CTO. He also owns a skincare franchise called Heyday. It's pretty cool. And I'm sure he's into all kinds of other things. So Garrett, how about you tell us about who you are and where?
So, as you mentioned, I've kind of been around the block in various different technology roles. I was at Microsoft for a number of years and then Expedia also for a decade. And, as I was in those roles, I found myself drawn more and more to the startup world, first as just kind of an investor, angel investor. And then as more of an advisor, working with the companies. And, I found myself really drawn to kind of that whole startup community. So I ended up co-founding my own startup in the childcare space. And that was really a lot of fun, just kind of building something from nothing. And, a lot of work, a lot of sweat. We ultimately ended up selling to a complementary company. So it was great to see the technology live on, I should say. And, as part of that, I ended up kind of going into, as you mentioned, sort of a fractional CTO role where I'm helping companies and primarily smaller companies still with, their technology, kind of, some leadership insights that I can provide. And then, the franchise that I have was kind of my dab back into company ownership without really having to put in quite as much blood and, sweat as you do building something from the ground up.
You forgot the tears.
Oh, yeah, a lot of tears. I still have tears. I mean, running the franchise, but, not quite as much blood and sweat.
That's cool. So have you been reading any books lately that have made an impact
So,
on you?
Right now I'm reading a book called Your Next 5 Moves. And, basically it talks about business strategy and sort of equates that to playing chess, right? I'm really kind of thinking through, what are your next 5 moves as you do, when you're playing chess. And a lot of what they say, that really spoke to me is the idea of really just kind of understanding what you can and cannot control and really being mindful of what you're trying to accomplish and what that sort of end state is. If you play chess, it might be that, you're trying to set up a certain position on the board where you're able to, corner the king, behind his row pawns or whatever it happens to be. And, in chess, you have to react to what the other player does, even if you are thinking a few moves ahead. It's not as simple as, okay, I'm going to do A, B, C, D, E. I might have to change that course, but I know where I'm heading. Similar to, business strategy. Think about what your end goal is. Think about what the other players are doing and be able to react based on their moves.
I like that. That's a really cool analogy. I'm going to buy the book and read it.
I got it right here. List. So if you can,
I love that. Awesome. Yeah, I'll put a link to that in the show notes so that everybody can check it out on Amazon. I love to add books to my list, and I love to get great recommendations from people like you because that's every book on my list is like that. It's a recommendation that came from somebody. So thank you. So back when we were talking about doing this episode together, I warned you that we were going to have a segment where I kind of, I put you on the spot and ask you to come up with something that's kind of like it shows your human side. And so what you got? What's a mistake, an embarrassing mistake that you've made as a tech lead?
I wanted to talk about when I first moved to Expedia from Microsoft. And, this was back in 2009. And I had been working, on shrink wrap software, on Windows software at Microsoft. And when we came to Expedia, one of the first things that I was doing was overseeing a release of kind of a service update that dealt with, searching for flights on Expedia. And as we were preparing for the release, one of the things that I was, asking my team was, hey, have you tested this, against different configurations on the hardware and make sure, different registry settings, different applications that could be interfering with this, et cetera. And they just kind of looked at me and they're like, we own the box. This is just, we're not actually, selling this software. It's just going to run as a service. And I realized, oh, yeah, of course. I mean, I had sort of this ingrained mindset of what it means to ship software based on shrink wrap software, and which is a totally different world than Expedia, where most companies are today, where it's all the service that you're releasing.
That must have been a mind-blowing transition.
It was
to go
from, at the time, it was a tough transition for me going from Microsoft Expedia. And, I think as we kind of talk through, today's topic, I benefited a lot from having a manager that practiced, what I'm preaching and sort of let me go through, learn from my mistakes and, eventually flourish.
Well, let's get into it. What do we mean by staying out of the details?
I mean, really, my general management philosophy is, to be hands-off but detail-oriented, right? It's the idea of giving people that freedom to shine, and to execute, to make those mistakes and recover on their own. It's not complete delegation. It's not, okay, just hand someone a task and then, forget about it for months on end. But it is the idea of, hey, I might have my own, I have my own experience. I might know how I want something to be done. I might have strong opinions on it. And it's fine to kind of set that direction, to set sort of maybe the architecture and the framework that you're working in, but you don't want to be micromanaging each step of the way as someone's doing their work. That just does them a disservice. They're not really going to learn and grow. It's going to just be taking orders effectively, as opposed to really kind of thinking through critically and really kind of growing along with it.
I think this is really important as leaders too, to help us grow, because when we need to learn how to lead and not manage. And when we start to stay out of the details, we start to learn patience, and we start to learn temperance, and we start to really flourish ourselves as leaders too. We can begin to trust people and also build cultures of trust where it just feels good and right and effective to stay out of the details.
Absolutely. It's great from a cultural perspective. I mean, it really gives the people that are working for you that sense of ownership, that sense of pride in what they do. And as a leader, it allows you to focus on the things that are really more important, on the bigger picture items, on kind of the business is going, on, how, in the case of technology, how does technology really help further the firm's, priorities, right? So that's, I find really, really important. One of the kind of an interesting anecdote on this, now in a fractional CTO role, I've been relying a lot more, like many engineers do, on AI, generated coding. And I find that being able to be out of the details, is really kind of foundational to what the whole movement is about, right? You need, for anybody who has done vibe coding before, like it's not it's not quite at the point, and I don't know if it'll ever be at the point where you can just completely hand a task off to AI and expect it to execute without you having to check in. Just taking the output and then releasing to production. You really need to be able to provide that guidance. You really need to be able to, review what's happening. You need to know what it is you're trying to accomplish. I mean, these are, factors obviously that make great leaders. Maybe you don't have to worry so much, about the culture that you're setting for your AI agents, but you do still need to a lot of those higher management skills.
So, okay, the benefits to us as leaders, that's clear. There are benefits to the company and the team. We get a lot of benefits out of staying out of the details because we begin to build trust as a team that helps the bottom line eventually. Mm-hmm. But let's really focus on the human side. So how does staying out of the details help with building teams that flourish?
Yeah, I mean, yourself, if you have a team, how much do you want that team to be just doing what you tell them to and not being able to execute unless you're there, to guide them and step them through the way, right? That's not good for the team. That's not good for the individual. It doesn't really give them that kind of sense of accomplishment, that sense of meaning and purpose, to be honest, right? Compare and contrast that with, being able to get in and feeling proud of your work, proud of your contributions, having that sense of accomplishment when you've gone in and, you have tackled the problem, you've thought it through, and you really get to understand it more deeply. Again, I mean, it was a very lighthearted example I gave you when I first moved to Expedia. But I had several, of those learning or relearning moments of, okay, what does it mean to kind of go from, working on Windows that ships on PCs across the world to delivering a service that allows people to search for travel. And if someone had just told me, okay, do it this way, like that. I mean, I wouldn't have really internalized what it means to work in a service-based world. And as I said, you look now, I mean, how much shrink wrap software really is, shipping right now. If I hadn't really built up that foundation and that knowledge, I think I'd be irrelevant.
So somebody out there is thinking, and I'll just speak for them right now, that yes, this is great. Staying out of the details sounds great, but what happens when people start to really screw things up? They're going down the wrong road. They didn't have the right details. They weren't able to decipher the details on their own. I've got to swoop in and provide the details. And if I am always staying out of the details, I might lose my edge. I might lose my ability to get back into the details and help people with problems. So what do we say to
a certain amount of it is, having the right guidance, right? Knowing, kind of how to guide and how to get something on track. It does, staying out of the details, as I said, doesn't mean just delegate and go away. It's not fire and forget. It's, more trust but verified, right? Trust that the people on your team are able to execute, are going to, genuinely want to do the right thing, but verify along the way, right? Do code reviews, do design reviews, give them an opportunity to present to you their approach, what they're doing, and provide the critical feedback, provide, the questions, and get them back on path if you think that they're sort of veering off. As far as kind of how do you sort of keep that edge, that sort of, building that opportunity to dive deep when necessary, and I think that's the key, is when necessary, will help you sort of maintain, your edge.
Okay, fair enough. I think you answered that pretty well. So as leaders, shift from naysayers to wanting to stay out of the details more and more. As they're making that transition, what are some things that you think they're going to discover along the way that mistakes they're going to make, pitfalls, maybe some things that we can warn them about.
And I do think that, people can stumble, a bit. I think the biggest thing and kind of one of the big problems I had, frankly, when I first became a leader was this idea of overshooting and like using fire and forgetting and thinking that, okay, let me find the best or maybe the most interesting tasks, for someone on my team, give it to them and let them run with it. And then only check in, on maybe a monthly basis, bi-weekly basis, to see how they're going. It can be tempting to do that. And you might think that you're growing them. And, in some cases, maybe they're at that level, they're able to really just kind of run, with things, but especially if it's an area that, you grew up in and they're going to benefit a lot from, guidance and from check-ins with you.
So if staying out of the details is so great, if there are so many benefits, why don't more leaders do this?
Yeah. I think that there can be a bit of difficulty that, leaders have in terms of giving up control, and a lot of times, especially newer leaders will think that, hey, what I've done before, is what got me into this role. Like I am, and I need to show that I'm the best developer on the team. I need to continue to deliver, better than everyone, who works for me. And that's not really true, right? I think that a lot of people struggle with or don't make that mental shift to, I'm in a fundamentally different role now, right? I'm not that star developer on the team. I'm the one that needs to make sure my team is successful. And staying out of the details, kind of being in that coaching, mentoring role is really what not only is going to help you deliver that, but frankly is what's expected of you.
This was a really hard pill for me to swallow several years ago. And I remember how it felt. And it was definitely, there was a moment when I had to decide whether I was going to be this kind of leader, or continue doing what I was doing, because I came from an IC role and I was the star developer and I was always the savior flying in to save the day. And I was in the details constantly. And I had to learn a hard lesson that as a leader, my value that I bring is not in the things that I can do and the code that I can write and the systems that I can stand up. It's in the people that I invest in and the people that I can grow. That's where my value comes as a leader. And that was a really hard lesson to learn, but I am so glad I learned it, because that's the only reason why I can be an effective leader today.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, it sounds though that you did get through that, and I'm sure that you become a great leader because of that.
Well, and I'm feeling the same vibe from you, and I really appreciate the chance to kind of get some of your insight and wisdom about this, because as we grow as leaders, we find that we've never arrived. We always have ways to learn, and so this is a really great conversation, helping me a lot. So can you kind of just really solidify this for me and for everybody else out there, by just sharing a time when staying out of the details led to some unexpected results?
Yeah, I mean, I have two stories I can share with you. Kind of the one that was, again, I almost put in as sort of one of my embarrassing moments, and the other where I think I was able to really help someone thrive in advance of their career. So the first one was, and maybe you had a similar experience. When I first became a manager, this was back working on predecessors to smartphones, just kind of small handheld devices. And I was working on the calendar application as an IC. And I became a lead on the email client. Similar, domain, but, of course, a different application. And I thought my role there was really to become that star developer, to ramp up and understand the code base and take on all the grunt work projects, free up people to do kind of the cool and interesting stuff. And, I was firing and forgetting. I wasn't really paying attention, to what was going on. And one of my directs, who was up and coming, really was kind of paying that attention, and was kind of helping guide and mentor the others on the team, really doing my job, to be honest, in retrospect. And, I ended up getting demoted. He ended up taking over the team, as a result. And, I was asked to just keep focusing back on calendar again, right? And it took another year and a half before that opportunity, came back in a different area. And, that time I had learned my lesson, and I was able to kind of delegate, but still kind of keep, my eye on what was going on, that trust but verify. The second one, which I'm glad to say is not as embarrassing for me, was at Expedia, where I, we had taken on kind of an important task to, again, related to flight search, and helping provide kind of the best options for travelers. It was not necessarily the cheapest, if you've ever done flight searches, the cheapest one's not necessarily the best. But I kind of stayed out of the details. I really worked much closer with the business team to understand, okay, what are those factors that, make for good flights, and really helped my direct kind of take those inputs and really build out a good system. That ended up giving us much better, conversion, much better results, and helped my direct, deliver this with flying colors. I mean, we exceeded what we were hoping for. And ultimately, she ended up really growing into her role, becoming, director. And, today she's a VP of engineering at Expedia. So, I'm really happy to say that I think I played a part towards that.
Yeah. And I can actually say with confidence, I mean, I've experienced what you all did personally, I think, because I use Expedia all the time to book my flights, and not to plug Expedia or anything like that. It's not supposed to be an endorsement, but I mean, you did a pretty good job. So I appreciate that. Thank you. So Garrett, if there's one thing that tech leaders should start doing tomorrow to build teams that flourish, to help to improve team flourishing, what would it be?
I would say, take a look at what your team is involved in, and specifically what is it that you are spending most of your IC time and work towards, right? And ask yourself if there's an opportunity here for someone, to be able to take that on. Is there a way that you can maybe step back from actually doing the work yourself, or being, very in the minutia, and instead provide a bit more strategic guidance and help?
Yeah, and that's powerful. That's good stuff. So how can people connect with you? I've got some links for you for different sites and things, and I'll put them in the show notes, but how do you think people can best connect with you?
Yeah, I mean, so I have a website, just GarrettVargas.com. It's very simple. This is my name. And, that has a lot of details about some of the things I'm working on, as well as link to many blog articles, that I've written over the last few years. But you can also reach out on LinkedIn. I think there's a link off of that GarrettVargas.com website, but you can also find me there. There are many Garrett Vargases, I think, as we were saying before we started recording. It's not necessarily the most common combination of names out there. But I'm active on LinkedIn as well.
Awesome. Well, we'll make sure that all those links go in the show notes, and people can connect with you there. Garrett, this has been a great conversation. I really appreciate your time and your wisdom and your experience, and teaching us better how to
Well,
stay out of the
thank you for having me on.
This has been another episode of the Team Amplifier podcast. Thanks for joining us. Now, get out there and be a team amplifier.